This is the Meadows. It's a scheme of 69 homes, mostly 3-bed family houses, but we do have some 2-bed and 4-bed houses as well, plus a couple of 1-bed apartments. We think that the scheme has strong urban design principles. It's been based around that with the discussions with the developer. There's a whole range of different house types and house forms, ranging from, as I said, from 1-bed units right through to 4-bed units, but also catering for single people right through to 7- and 8-person household makeup.
We built 60 homes on the schemes. These were on the scheme. This was a brownfield site. It was derelict. It was an area of antisocial behaviour. It was a nuisance for the residents living here, and now we have 60 families, which is great.
So yeah, up here in the community, when we first got the house from Tua, they had said they could help us build a residents committee up here for the community inside the Meadows. So from J1 we have gone down. Tua have been very helpful. They have shown us the steps, and we have actually had lots of successful days to help our community back.
So the community centre that we have occupied here in the Meadows area is a centre provided to us by Tua Housing, and it means so much to us because it's the first time we've had a dedicated premises in the community to provide services to families and to work with our partners locally. And also it's the first centre and service available in this particular estate, and we're very honoured, I suppose, to be taking up occupancy there to open it up to the community as well.
So the Coleman Residence Group was set up in 2019, and it's made up of Tua tenants, private owners and council tenants. And it's gone from strength to strength since it was set up.
So all our nominations come from Cork City Council, so they'd come from the Cork City Council housing waiting list. The whole development is completely full. I suppose a very positive aspect of it that we don't have a transfer list for here, so everybody that lives here are happy here and they want to live here and they want to stay here, and they've made it their own community, so which is great.
The Meadows is an excellent example of collaboration because it shows how residents from different tenures can all work collectively together to develop sustainable communities.
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the ICSH National Social Housing Conference. I just want to kick off by thanking our sponsors, AIB, who have been unwavering in their support and without whom we could not make this a freely accessible event. So thank you very much to our sponsors. My name is Karen Murphy and I'm the Director of Policy with the Irish Council for Social Housing. The session this morning that we're kicking off today with is called Housing Option or Affordability Options for All. And I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of 4 speakers who are all actively involved in finding solutions and delivering affordable housing in very difficult and challenging circumstances. So the 4 speakers we have this morning are John Coleman, who's the Chief Executive of the Land Development Agency, and the LDA, who will have a significant role in Housing for All. So we look forward to John's presentation this morning. John will be followed by Marc McGovern, who's Councillor Marc McGovern, former Mayor of Cambridge City in Massachusetts. And Marc has been a leader in delivering affordable solutions in his city. So we look forward to Marc's presentation, and bear in mind that he's up at 6 o'clock in the morning to join us to do that. So a special thank you to Marc. Following Marc will be Brian O'Gorman, who's the CEO of Clúid Housing. Brian has been a leader in the non-profit housing sector for many, many years and has recently taken on, I suppose, not just social housing, but cost rental housing in delivering affordable options. So we look forward to Brian's presentation, who will be followed by Hugh Brennan, and Hugh's Chief Executive of Cualann Co-Housing Alliance. And again, Hugh is deeply involved in, I suppose, providing solutions for affordability and access to housing for people. And Hugh is an engineer by profession. So Hugh, we look forward to lots of solutions from yourself in your input. So just to say, we will have a Q&A at the end with the 4 speakers. But you can put your questions through the Q&A function throughout. So please do, any questions you have, pop them in the Q&A and we'll come to that at the end. So just to kick off, John, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thanks also to Lindsay and of course Donald McManus at the Irish Council for Social Housing for inviting me to attend today. It's and hello to all the delegates and attendees. It's a good time, I guess, to be presenting about the LDA in relation to affordability, because the LDA Act is now in existence. So it's passed. The Affordable Housing Act is now in existence, which is a core driver of the LDA. And of course, Housing for All, the government strategy on housing, has been released as well, which has very significant impacts on the LDA in a positive way, I believe. So it's a good time for me to be here. And so what I'll talk to you today about is just to give you a snapshot of the LDA and our progress to date, an overview of our general approach and strategy, which is split in between the short and the long terms, but both interlinked, and then to obviously talk through Housing for All, namely the commitment to transfer additional land to the LDA. So we're working on schemes where we've designed teams in place in the shorter term for that can yield around 6,000 homes. In the longer term, the government has committed to transferring land that can bring this delivery capacity up to around 21,000 homes through additional land transfers. We're also, in addition to that, seeking to engage in the private sector where there are planning permissions in existence but haven't commenced, which could yield around 80,000 homes nationwide. So we're targeting to see, can we bring in any commercial incentives or commercial constructs that can result in the delivery of about 5,000 homes there, all for affordable housing. So that's the purpose of it. I'll talk a bit more about Housing for All later on. Our values, it's good to touch on, because the first one there, they're all interlinked and interconnected, but affordability is the key driving force of the LDA, and that's what we look at in any scheme or any situation that we get involved in. That's the first question that we ask ourselves: how do we drive affordability here? Obviously, that plays a key role in all the other values that we have around, particularly sustainability, because affordable housing is sustainable housing. On our current site portfolio, we're active on about 10 kind of near-term sites. I describe them as that can yield around 6,000 homes. They're denoted by, on this schedule, on this diagram, the house type icons, whereas the skyscraper type icons denote the strategic areas we're working on, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a moment. So in the short term, we're taking state lands and trying to get better uses for them to result in the delivery of affordable housing. A good example of that is St. Kevin's Hospital in Cork City, where we've planning approval for 264 homes. We're getting ready to go to tender on that very shortly. It's 100% social and affordable, and that's been a blight on the horizon in Cork City for a number of years. So you'll see a nicer diagrammatic from our architects on the bottom diagram there. Another one, which is a really good example of how we work with local authorities, is a partnership with Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, which we're out to tender on at the moment. We expect tenders back in November. So all social and affordable, with the emphasis being on affordability. So 306 cost rental homes and 91 affordable purchase. So that's a magnificent site. It's going to be a great scheme. And again, I think it's appropriate for this discussion, given that we're here to talk about affordability. So what we've been doing, actually our 3-year anniversary just passed just over a week ago. The 13th of September 2018 is when we were launched from really a base of nothing to now, where we have a number of schemes up and running in design and about to go to construction, and over 50 staff as well to drive that along. But what we've been doing fundamentally is getting all of those opportunities, getting them designed, trying to get them through the planning system, and getting them shovel ready so that we can start delivering affordable homes. The policy obviously has caught up in the meantime around affordability, which will overlay how we deliver these in terms of 10-year mix. In the longer term, the core reason why the LDA was set up was as an agent to inspire coherent delivery of strategic areas that are complex, much larger generally than, say, infill development schemes, which probably characterize most of our shorter term sites. So the LDA would act as an assembly, an active land management agent, and to bring together the necessary infrastructure, the necessary finance, and to collaborate with landowners in terms of getting larger scale areas delivered. There's a couple of examples of those there. Cork City, we're working on the Docklands area with Cork City Council to deliver that. We've issued a master plan or a high-level design review for Sandy Road in Galway, and also the digital hub is a strategic area in the city centre of Dublin that we plan on advancing soon. And probably the most advanced one that we have is Colbert, which is a station in Limerick, which is 50 hectares nearly of developable land around the main train station in Limerick city centre. So we launched that with the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien TD, last week on Thursday. I must say it was really nice to be able to do that in person. We had a limited number of attendees in Limerick to attend this launch. But essentially what we've released is what we call a draft spatial framework, but it's a master plan for consultation with the community. The state owns all the land here, and following feedback from on the master plan from this very large area right in the middle of Limerick city centre, we plan on bringing forward in the near future, probably 2022, 2023 planning applications to deliver on those lands. So that's that was released last week. It's colbertquarter.ie, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you get the opportunity. The beauty of it is the land is controlled by the government, and the government has committed to transferring the land into the control of the LDA in the near future. We get inspiration from these kind of strategic areas from a number of examples throughout Europe. Some of those that are interested in urban planning will be familiar with these. Hafen City and Nordhaven are two of my favourite ones because they have been successful in terms of their delivery so far. On the delivery and the affordability piece, what will be of interest to the attendees here is that the mix, the 10-year mix, requires us on state lands to deliver 100% on state control lands, 100% affordable and social housing in Dublin and Cork, being the most acute affordability issues and areas that we have in the country at the moment. The mechanisms obviously are cost rental, which would be very key for us, particularly on the higher density homes. Affordable purchase is obviously very key as well. So we're looking at these by taking a very long-term horizon on them in terms of our financial underwriting of them, so we take a very long-term view on them. And we would like, I guess, in my mind's eye, to achieve scale, and very significant scale, by leveraging state lands and by leveraging the capital that's available to us to help initiate and drive a cost rental sector of scale with multiple operators in the country. It's largely facilitated in the nearer term by access to local authority land, and we're lucky to have developed a lot of relationships around the country with local authorities to facilitate this. So two of the bigger schemes that we have at the moment with local authorities are St. Teresa's Gardens, which we call Denora Project, and then Shangana in both in Dublin. But essentially the LDA is bringing money, project management to the table, and a mandate around state land, of course, where we can stitch that to local authority land, like in Colbert. The local authorities bringing land access and corporate knowledge and community relationships. So it's a pretty good marriage. So what we would see is bringing all those landowners and stakeholders together to coordinate and drive affordable home delivery at scale. And we're open-minded in terms of the operating structures as to how that's done. We should be getting built homes released, we hope, through our Project Tusig initiative, maybe 2020, early 2023. And then we'll have to have a think about what are the operating structures then around that. To give you a sense of what we think it should look like, it's probably along the lines of what a lot of people think, but in Shangana, we're thinking somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 a month for a 2-bed apartment. I mean, that's probably a third or more or less than the market, but we're really looking to see is this affordable for the target market, and we believe it is, because it tends to land at roughly 1/3 of that cohort's income, net income. So when you think about the LDA, I've talked about the short and long term. I think in the short term, we'll be driving on these nearer term sites. Over the long term, those larger scale strategic areas are going to come to fruition. So we'll have to have a think about how we manage that transition in the coming years, and how we bring forward those longer term initiatives that I've mentioned, the likes of Colbert. Housing for All has been a significant boon for the LDA. We've got our capital increased by increasing our borrowing capacity by $1 billion to give us a $3.5 billion firepower. The lands, as I mentioned, which are mainly strategic in nature, can yield around 15,000 homes, we think. The interesting aspect of that is a lot of them are adjacent to underutilized private sector lands. So the idea would be to try and master plan those to result in the kind of coherent delivery of larger scale there where possible, just like in Cork Docks and Inchicore course as well. Project Tusig is something that we want to result in delivery in the nearer term. So to understand why all of those planning consents that are in the private sector that could yield 80,000 homes haven't been delivered, and what can we do to bring those about, but to deliver them as affordable housing. The other interesting thing to attendees here will be the transfer of NAMA's NARP's portfolio to the LDA, and that the LDA will own and operate that in the coming years. So the challenges are many, but the opportunities are also many. The planning system is tricky at the moment. I think we know that. We've been on the receiving end of a refusal, but also JR is a huge risk for our schemes. I welcome the government's resolve to try and deal with some of those issues. We'd like to get to that critical mass of cost rental to get those efficiencies. We have to start from somewhere. We're starting from zero pretty much, but I'm delighted to see AHBs and ourselves really put a lot of focus into that going forward. And obviously in the near term, costs such as materials inflation are a big issue for us. The opportunities, I think we've a real opportunity now to establish a cost rental sector of scale and to accelerate affordable housing as a sector in this country. We can't do it ourselves. We recognise that we have to collaborate with others. So we're more than willing to do that. So I think once we achieve that, hopefully affordability won't be a thing in Ireland in the longer term, that affordable housing will be taken as the norm. And I think that's what we're all seeking to achieve. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Great to see, I suppose, the energy and enthusiasm going into building up the Land Development Agency. But also fantastic to see, I suppose, the long-term trajectory for the LDA becoming a strategic enabler of development over time, which we badly need in this country. So thanks very much for that. I'll hand over now to Councillor Marc McGovern from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to ICSH for inviting me. I'm really humbled to be here, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'm going to talk today about what we call the affordable housing overlay, and that is an overlay zoning that we passed in the City Council last October, and it was meant to make building affordable housing in the city more financially viable. So first, I want to go through a little bit of our demographics in Cambridge so folks get a sense of who we are and the issues that we're up against. We have a population of about 118,000, a little over. We're the second most densely populated city in the state, and we're in the top 10 as the most densely populated cities in the country. Since 2010, population in Cambridge has grown by about 14,000. And in that time, we have only permitted and built about 6,000 new housing units. And we have a lot of people moving into the city for our biotech and innovation economy here in Cambridge. Those are all very high-paying jobs, and we're simply not producing enough housing, market or affordable, to meet the demand of the growing population. We're 66% white, 16.8% Asian, 10.7% Black, 9.5% Hispanic, and 6.4% other. So we're a diverse community. I made sure to note that Irish ancestry is our most common ancestry here in Cambridge. I know my audience. We have about 55,000, a little over 55,000 housing units, of which 8,300 are considered affordable. 65% of our stock is rental, 35% owner occupied. The average price for a single family home in Cambridge is about $1.7 million. Two-family home is about $1.6 million. For rent, a one-bedroom apartment goes for around $2,250 a month. A two-bedroom is $2,750, and a three-bedroom is $3,500. This here is a map of redlining that happened in the United States and in Cambridge. Redlining was when banks and elected officials really sort of literally drew red lines on their city maps to determine which neighborhoods were considered the most desirable or the least desirable, and they used those maps to determine who got mortgages in certain neighborhoods, who didn't get mortgages in certain neighborhoods. They used them to change zoning, and what resulted was areas where certain folks, usually based on race, income, immigration status, were really sort of kept out of certain neighborhoods in cities. And Cambridge, like every other city in the United States, has that history, which is something we are not proud of, because it really did segregate the city in a lot of ways. And what you see here is in the blue, or I'm sorry, the green is sort of what is considered the most desirable section of the city. The blue is slightly less desirable, yellow is slightly less desirable, and then the orange is the least desirable, and the purple dots are where affordable housing is in the city. So as you can see, you know, what the city did many, many decades ago is in the less desirable, they segregated these neighborhoods into what is less desirable and what is more desirable. And you can see that that's where most of the affordable housing and low income housing are in areas that are considered less desirable. So we still are living with that racist and classist history, which is something we are trying to dismantle. This slide shows where the affordable housing is in our city. And again, it's just sort of another way of looking at the previous slide of sort of where the housing is. And you can see that these large sections that are white, which are mostly in the more expensive neighborhoods that were deemed as the most desirable neighborhoods, you have almost no affordable housing whatsoever. And there are some areas where it's just impossible for people of low to moderate incomes to rent, and certainly even more impossible for them to purchase. And you see here where in what were considered some of the less desirable sections where there's the bulk of the affordable housing. So what is what we call the AHO, the Affordable Housing Overlay? This is a citywide zoning overlay that offers height and density bonuses and permitting predictability to those who wish to build 100% affordable housing. This housing has to be 100% in perpetuity. They can't flip it to market rent at any point. And in exchange for creating that housing, we give them certain bonuses and permitting predictability to make it more financially viable and easier to build. The purposes of the AHO are to make it more financially viable to build affordable housing. Land costs in Cambridge are incredibly expensive. And so if, for example, in those areas where most of the higher income and less affordable neighborhoods, if a two-family home sold for, you know, 1.6 or $2 million, an affordable housing developer simply can't afford to buy that home and finance their project. If under the overlay, they can turn that 2-unit house into a 6 or an 8, because we give them height and density bonuses, that spreads the cost of the per unit cost out over more units. Now they can actually bid on those properties and hopefully purchase them. And then by doing that, we're hoping that we will get more affordable housing in the more expensive neighborhoods of the city, so that we can continue to diversify the housing stock and allow people to live in neighborhoods that are currently off limits to them. So why is it necessary? Affordable housing developers cannot compete with market rate developers who can afford to pay more for land and for buildings. There are also areas of the city, current zoning makes that creation of new affordable housing infeasible, allowing affordable housing providers to build more densely than market rate developers will create opportunities in these neighborhoods. For market developers don't get these additional benefits, and so it allows the affordable housing developers to compete and try to even out the scale. Affordable housing developers have also faced long and costly permitting challenges, delaying their ability to complete new affordable units. By streamlining the approval process for new 100% affordable housing, will help reduce development costs and allow affordable housing providers to create new affordable units. We see a lot of projects that get held up at our planning board or our board of zoning appeals, numerous public meetings, sometimes 10, 20, 30, that continue to delay projects, where we see neighborhoods and abutters take projects to court and tie developments up in long court battles that for-profit developers can sometimes, because they have more money, can sometimes last and sort of get through, but affordable housing developers suffer from that. You can see here that this is a list of what was available and why this is important in Cambridge. As you can see, in 2019, affordable housing developers identified 9 opportunities for them that they could purchase. 2 of them were existing multifamilies. 7 of the 9 were for new developments, but they didn't even make any offers on those properties because it was financially infeasible. And so the overlay is meant to address that. This is just a quick slide on how the affordable housing breaks down in Cambridge through our different neighborhoods. And what you see, the Port, which is one of those neighborhoods that was considered least desirable, 34% of the housing is affordable. West Cambridge, which was considered the most desirable, 1.3% is considered affordable. So we have a tremendous disparity across our city. Under the AHO, and when we talk about height and density bonuses, we're really not talking about all that much in reality. So in zones in the city where the current zoning allows for less than 40 feet of development, under the AHO, you can build 45 feet. So we're only going up in most cases anywhere between 5 to 10 feet of height and 50 feet if you have active ground floor commercial or retail. In parts of the city where you can build currently 45 to 50 feet will allow you to go to 65 feet, 70 with retail. And in zones where you can currently build greater than 50 feet, you can have an 80-foot max. So again, the height is not all that great, but it does make a significant difference. Density, we will allow you to build twice the density that is allowed under current zoning. And again, this allows AHO projects to be larger, thus allowing costs to be allocated across more units. The permitting process under the AHO, you are required to have community meetings. You are required to submit your plans to what's called our planning board that reviews these projects. Presentation of public meetings. The public has the opportunity to comment on the projects. The planning board has the opportunity to comment on the projects. Developers often go back and revise and submit for a second meeting. And the planning board makes recommendations, but when I talk about streamlining, what we did was we took the planning board's formal approval away on these projects, which means they can make recommendations, but they're non-binding. So these projects can still move forward and not get hung up in the bureaucracy of the different boards and commissions. The process that we went through was a very long process in the city. In 2017 and 18, We did a citywide master plan looking at all kinds of housing and job opportunities and the environment, et cetera. It's called Envision Cambridge. Their housing working group recommended affordable housing overlay. Between January and March 2019, there were 5 public hearings of the Housing Committee of the City Council. We had 5 additional meetings with the Ordinance Committee of the City Council. The Planning Board had 3 meetings, and we had 15 neighborhood meetings between September and June over that year, and 7 open houses. In September 2019, the AHO expired without being passed. We refiled it in February of 2020. It expired again in May of 2020 because we did not have the votes. We refiled it again. It went through the process, and eventually on October 5th, 2020, it passed on a 7-2 vote of the City Council. The main objectives, again, bring affordable housing to neighborhoods where there's less affordable housing. These were some of the objections to this. People were, everyone in Cambridge says that they support affordable housing, but then there's often a but after that. I support affordable housing, but not in this location, not so close to where I live. But what about traffic? What about height? What about shadows? This was meant, the AHO was really meant to try and sort of get through those and say, yes, we understand that there are complicated factors in building this housing, but at the end of the day, we're committed to building this affordable housing and in every neighborhood in the city. So when you're going through this, if this is something that we were the first city in the country to have an initiative like this, it's now being modeled in other places. What I advise other cities, get more diverse voices at the table. I don't know if this is the same where you are, but in Cambridge and in most places in the United States, the people who participate in these conversations are very often wealthier folks, very often white, very often older, very often retired. And we don't get the diversity of voices at the table. So we rarely hear from the people who would actually benefit from this housing. So the people controlling the conversation are people who really have more wealth and more power in the community, and they should not be the only people at the table. Make sure that you're working on zoning changes. Make sure that those who benefit from affordable housing are prioritized in the conversation. Really, this is about, I think we can get too wonky with this stuff, and we can, get more into the weeds of, the dimensions and the aesthetics and this, that, and the other thing. And what we forget is what we were talking about are people. We were talking about people having the right and the ability to live in certain communities that are currently off limits to them. And we lose sight of that in these conversations. And that always needs to be front and center. And then, my goal is to eliminate the sentence, I support affordable housing, but anything you put after that but means that you are prioritizing that over affordable housing, which means you're prioritizing that over people having homes, not units on a spreadsheet, but homes in which to live and raise their families. So that is my presentation. And I thank you all, and I'm obviously will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think that was a fascinating overview of the challenges that you faced and how you brought some imagination into responding to them. So lots of the delegates listening in and watching will be interested in those streamlining measures in particular. But yeah, so thanks very much. I'm now going to pass over to Brian O'Gorman, who's the Chief Executive of Clúid Housing. And just to remind everybody, keep the questions coming in. John and Councillor, there are lots of questions there for you already. So we will be coming back to you shortly. But for now, I'll hand over to Brian. Thanks.
Good morning, and thanks to the ICSH for this opportunity to address you this morning. I'm going to talk to you this morning about the experience of cost rental as delivered by AHBs. How cost rental might sit alongside existing rental housing, talk briefly about the launch of the first cost rental scheme, and what needs to be changed if we want to better deliver cost rental housing. For me, this is about bringing AHB values to meet a different housing need, one which has traditionally been neglected and unmet in Ireland. These AHB's values include security of tenure, affordability, offering quality homes which are well located and professionally managed and maintained. The cost rental properties we develop as AHBs are available in perpetuity. Once paid for once, they're available to successive generations of Irish households. So that results in households that can invest economically and psychically in their homes, confident that they have that security. What this inevitably raises is, what type of landlords do we want to be? Cost rental cannot be managed in exactly the same way as social rental, since the risks are different, but nor do we want to operate as private landlords. When I get to the launch slide, you'll see how we brought the values of AHB to cost rental. For me, cost rental housing is housing which promotes social solidarity. All of us involved in meeting social housing need are conscious that we are unable to develop social housing by the tax returns of working households, a large segment of whom are consigned to poorer housing conditions than we develop. Cost rental helps to deliver this and promote that social solidarity across different tenures and across different sections of the Irish community. Affordability is a key and important benefit. Cost rental homes are provided at least 25% below market rent, and in reality, the discount is a lot greater than this. To endorse the approach we've taken, I'd reference the NESC report, Housing at the Crossroads, published in 2015, and their convincing argument that the accumulation of rental stock creates stability in our housing market. Also, the American Chamber of Commerce, which referenced by the Society of Chartered Surveyors, that the absence of affordable rental housing impedes our ability to attract and maintain workers in our major cities, seriously impacting upon our competitiveness as an economy. In the following slides, I'd like to look at where cost rental might sit amongst existing rental provision. So at the moment, we just have social rental, we have private rental. So how is cost rental going to fit into that mix? The first series of data is taken from a study by the rental tenants, the RTB, into a survey of landlords, tenants, and letting agents. And that was published just July of this year, so it's bang up to date. And this provides a sector of those who are currently renting privately. So 40% of residents are resident for 5 years or more, and then 40% for 2 years or less. So again, it's serving significantly different sections of the housing market. 24% of those renting privately are born outside Ireland. That's one in four have come to live in Ireland. 36% of their net income is spent on rent, and that rises to 41% in Dublin. 75% pay the same rent as when they moved in. And importantly, I think for the future of cost rental and the target market that we have, is that those aged 45 and more are likely to be renting long term. So these are the people that are, if you like, trapped within expensive private, continually increasing private rental accommodation, and find it difficult to get out. This slide is taken from a study and research that was done by the Housing Agency. And this looked at the experiences of renters and owners, and it was published in May 2019. So again, relatively recent. And part of this work contrasts the housing experiences of social and private renters. Now, there's no distinguishing of local authorities and AHB landlords, so I'm unsure what difference this would make. But I think it's useful to look at the experiences and the contrast. So social renters are less content than private renters. Now, they're pretty content at 77%, but private renters are 90% content. Social renters, as you might expect, live closer to where they were born. Social renters lack space. They've more difficulty with maintenance, more difficulty keeping warm. Social renters are less transient, and social renters experience greater affordability issues. Part of this contrast is undoubtedly down to income, but part as well, I think, is also about choice. And my hope into the future is that we can learn from such research, and that cost renters into the future will get the best of both the practices of both sectors. So the practices of social landlords and the choice and outlook of private renters. At the same time, perhaps improving the practices of both social and private landlords. I want to go on next and talk about the launch of cost rental. And the first cost rental scheme was launched on the 7th of July by Clúid in partnership with Glenveigh, Fingal County Council, and the Department of Housing and the Housing Agency. What we did, we advertised these properties on Daft, the property website, which is used exclusively in the private sector. We also developed a lottery engine, and this was to deal with the large demand for the properties which we were confident that we were going to get, but also to remove as much subjective bias as we can, as was possible to do. To avoid affordability issues, we used an income filter, and this was to ensure that no household who was going to occupy affordable cost rental housing would be spending more than 35% of their net income on rent. To remove the risk of over or under accommodation, we assessed household size, and then to set expectations both of the residents and our own, we met and interviewed all prospective residents in in-depth interviews. We received 196 applications over the 6 days that the application portal was open, so a huge demand. Our own research has led us to expect that the bulk of inquiries were from smaller households, and this has been borne out. We could have done with a lot more 1- and 2-bed properties, because this, we feel, is where the need for cost rental is. We greatly benefited also by collaborating with other AHBs. Their generous sharing of the insights helped to frame our own processes. And there's just a snapshot of a couple of the particular properties, a rogues gallery of some of the people who attended, and some of the inside facilities of the houses. So just to finish with some of the changes that I think would help to scale cost rental accommodation. The competition for the funding under the pilot scheme was based on a discount to market rent. And I feel that this did not result in the right properties being selected. The need is for smaller properties. And going forward, I think a different process is needed to make sure that those are the properties that are selected. The competition also was set out as an expression of interest. If you're doing this on an annual basis, then you cannot put in long-term planning, and you can't get value for money. So changes in the way that the cost rental schemes are selected, I think, would also have much better outcomes. There's also, for me, an obvious place for cost rental in age-friendly accommodation. Anyone who's gone through downsizing for an elderly relative is acutely aware of this need and the potential benefits of this. Finally, then, I'd like to say that a lot has been achieved in a very short period of time. I've mentioned and credited the AHBs and the housing people who continue to advocate for cost rental over many years. And I'd also need to acknowledge the role of the Housing Agency and the department who contributed to the delivery of this scheme. The scheme was put together in a relatively short period of time, so it does need refining. My hope is the political consensus remains behind cost rental, because I firmly believe that the potential exists that in time cost rental will be seen as the key initiative emerging from Housing for All. With that, I'll hand you back to Karen. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Brian. I think that was a really good, thorough understanding of how that, I suppose, first delivery of cost rental has gone. And I think in terms of Clúid to respond, we're all early adopters of the cost rental model. I suppose what you've shared with us there, Brian, is invaluable in terms of understanding what the potential pitfalls are or how we can make it better. So appreciate that. That was very, very helpful. Hugh, I'm going to hand over to you now, the final speaker this morning. So Hugh from Cualann Cohousing Alliance, thanks very much.
Good morning, Karen, thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank the Irish Council for Social Housing for inviting me onto this panel today to discuss options for affordability in housing. I tell you, it's a tough ask given the three speakers who have gone before me, because really, like, there's so much, and I've been busy taking notes about what all of them said. And I think the one really interesting thing is that we all have so much in common, and that our goals are I think are very much aligned. Coleman is an approved housing body, but Mr. Spock from Star Trek might look at us and say it's an AHB gym, but not as we know it. Our vision is to provide fully integrated, permanently affordable housing in sustainable communities around the country, and that's what everybody wants, I think. We are collaborating at the moment and hope to continue to collaborate with other AHBs to achieve this. I might give up though getting the morning newspaper because every day I'm reading about rising rents, rising house prices, unaffordable housing, people couch surfing, people putting off starting their families because they can't afford their accommodation. I believe that the Irish Council for Social Housing needs to be at the forefront of this battle to tackle affordability in housing. We know that there's no silver bullet. We know that there's not, one solution to the problem, but we also know that it can be solved. And we know that we have the necessary skills amongst us all in the Irish Council for Social Housing to solve the problem. You might consider my next point trivial, but I believe that we should start by changing the name of the Irish Council for Social Housing. Wow, okay. I believe that it needs to include a reference to affordable housing. There are a load more creative minds out there than mine who can come up with the appropriate name, but some suggestions might be the Irish Council for Social and Affordable Housing, the Irish Council for Public Housing, or if you want to keep the acronym the same, which might be a good idea, it could be the Irish Council for Subsidised Housing, but others can come up with the name, but I do think it needs to include affordable housing. You may quote Juliet to me from her balcony scene, where she asks, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. But I think the name is important. And I think currently, I'm afraid, it tends to exclude affordable housing. Changing the name will mean that we have to have a definition for affordable housing. And this is really important as well. And I would ask that definition, as others have suggested earlier on, I would ask that it not be linked to market prices. Currently in schemes for which we are tendering, we are told that the affordable housing price is market price less a certain percent. I would love to see that definition referring to the ability of low to middle income earners to pay for their housing needs. I propose that we go with the internationally accepted norm that for housing to be affordable, residents should pay no more than 33% of their net income, their take-home pay, on their housing needs. And those housing needs include rent or mortgage, upkeep if you're the owner, and your utilities. I suggest that no one should be paying more than 30% of their net income on their mortgage and no one paying more than 31% of their net income on their rent. I would also like to see more approved housing bodies getting involved in affordable housing for purchase, and this may necessitate a change in their constitutions. Cualann started building in Ballymun in partnership with Dublin City Council 5 years ago next month. And in that time, we have only, and I say only, delivered less than 100 homes in 5 years. The good news, though, from our perspective, is that we have 750 homes in our immediate pipeline. And you may have seen that we were recently awarded a scheme which was under public competition out with South Dublin County Council for 372 affordable homes out there, alongside 120 social and 120 affordable. Our schemes are a mix of social, mainly for older people, some for people with special needs, mainly affordable housing for purchase, and hopefully affordable houses to rent under the cost rental scheme. Because we are involved in conversations with 2 other AHBs and Dublin City Council about a really good scheme in the Ballymun area. We do not own or manage any housing units ourselves, and so we have a collaboration agreement with TUA at the moment, who will own and manage our social housing. Coleman has the skills and the capacity to act as a delivery partner for others who may want to get involved in this space. We, interestingly, were privately funded, and therefore at the moment we're not subject to public procurement rules, which might be a help. And effectively we're delivering the affordable housing units off balance sheet. Obviously we can't continue to work alone, and I'm delighted to hear John Coleman's emphasis on affordable housing, and we're absolutely open to working with the LDA, but I really would love to see more approved housing bodies getting involved in this space. I think we also need to look carefully at how affordable housing can be affordable in perpetuity, and Brian referred to this, and he's absolutely right that when it's cost rental, that can be engineered into the start. But at the moment, affordable housing for purchase, the mechanisms that are there do not allow it to be affordable in perpetuity, and that's because when the house is first sold under the scheme that we're using, where there is a clawback, that it becomes unaffordable effectively because it's back in the market once it's sold once. So you will have read of the controversy, if you like, about the sale of one of our houses in Ballymun recently. There is a clawback provision in that sale, and that clawback protects the local authority's investment in the development. The clawback worked exactly as it was supposed to work. In fact, the local authority will get back more than the cost of the site and the waived development levies. The problem is that once the house is sold back on the open market, it is no longer affordable. Our preference is and has always been that if one of our members is selling or needs to sell, that they sell back to us at a pre-agreed price. And that price should be linked to wage inflation and not to property inflation or inflation in general. The mechanism in the new affordable housing bill to protect the state's or the local authority's investment is shared equity. This will protect the state investment, but as soon as the house is sold, it's back on the open market, and therefore it means that those houses are not affordable in perpetuity. When the first shared equity scheme houses are sold in 3 or 4 years' time, it will generate the same amount of controversy, because although the local authority will get their equity back, the purchaser will also get their uplift. You may know of Self-Organised Architects, SOA. They have done some really very good work and published some really valuable documents on community-led housing and community land trusts. And this is another means by which permanently affordable housing can be assured. So look, Karen, I'm going to leave it at that, but just to conclude, I'm saying I would love to see if the name of the Irish Council of Housing could be changed to include affordability, to absolutely stress that we have the skills necessary to solve this problem within the members of the Irish Council for Social Housing. We need to ensure affordability is permanent for all, whether it's cost rental or for purchase, and we need more AHBs involved to work along with the LDA and local authorities. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for that, Hugh. I think that was really fascinating overview of your work, but also your thoughts on where we're at in this space and time. And I think it's possible you may be known as Romeo of the sector from now on. So just to warn you, I suppose that's a suggestion that we'll need to take on board. That within the ICSH, we'd be more than happy to look at that. So yeah, appreciate you raising it. The other thing I appreciate you raising is just that call for collaboration. I think it's vital that we all work together. The scale and the depth of the plan it is nothing short of what's needed, given the scale and depth of the crisis. So I know everyone around the table today has, I suppose, been collaborating over many years, and that's why they're here. That's why the four of you are here, because you're actually delivering solutions. So I do have a lot of questions in, which is great. So you've generated quite a bit of interest. I'm going to go back to the start, John. The questions for you are coming in first. So I group a few together and let you answer, and then I'll move on through. The very first question is around the presentations. Will they be made available to attendees? So I can answer that one. That's an easy one. All of the presentations that we can share are available on the conference website. If you go into the conference resources section, you will see the presentations after they've been given appear there. So you can move around the website and have a look at what's available, but the presentations are there under conference resources. So John, I suppose a couple of very direct questions. Number one, is the LDA ruling out any prospect of the AHBs who have been managing the NARP's homes from owning them or acquiring them themselves? And then secondly, I suppose great to see the LDA getting involved in scale, but will they also be working on the large amount of existing derelict properties, many of which would be single properties? So would you have plans to work in that area? So we'll kick off with those two questions.
Sure, I'll take the last one first, if that's okay, Karen. We don't have a particular mandate around derelict properties. We'd be targeting, as a general rule of thumb, we're trying to, I guess we're one agency and we're only one piece of the jigsaw, but we're targeting the kind of more scalable opportunities that we find. So individual derelict houses or properties probably isn't in our radar at the moment, unless they were grouped in an area where there was a larger strategic angle, I guess, where it would unlock scale. So in that instance, we'd be interested. In terms of the LDA and its impact on NARPs, I guess nothing changes. Like there's agreements in place between NARPs and the approved housing bodies in relation to buyout clauses of those properties, is my understanding. So that doesn't change. I guess what you have with the LDA is someone that is open to kind of sensible discussions with the AHBs about what makes sense in the round, what's best for housing, what's best for the AHBs, what's best for the sector, and I guess that's where I would describe the LDA as a friendly counterparty, and its ownership of NARPs will take that into account as well. So, but nothing changes in terms of the legal construct between NARPs and the AHBs.
Okay, I think a lot of AHBs will be, I suppose, glad to hear that, John, in particular around the buyout clause, that's obviously there's a contractual relationship there. And yeah. I do think, Brian, probably from Clúid's perspective, you'd be interested in continuing that conversation with John and the LDA in relation to those properties. As you have a long-term, I suppose, landlord-tenant relationship in place there, it makes sense over time to seek to acquire them. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, I think I would. But I think I would agree with John as well that it's what the best outcome will be ultimately in terms of other factors that are at play, and certainly the best outcome for the residents and so on.
Great.
But I think we would, as you say, have an interest in continuing that conversation and developing it further.
Great. Thanks very much, John. Brian, there's a question here for you in relation to the phasing out of the long-term leasing model. And do you feel this will limit affordable rental properties? I suppose the availability of rental properties for social tenants over time.
we've never done a huge amount of leasing, mainly because our model has been, as it is with a lot of AHBs, has been, making the properties available in perpetuity, and we've carried that forward into the cost rental as we do on the social rental side. But as was mentioned by some of the speakers yesterday, all leasing isn't the same. So leasing at the end of lease terms, there are certain financing arrangements that then transfer the properties to the long-term provider, whether it be the local authority, the AHB, or perhaps the LDA, or in time. So I think all leasing isn't the same, but I think what for us, we would be very supportive of a mechanism which ensure that leased properties, even if they continue in some way, would eventually be available and be a continued asset to the state in time. I'd say it's really about building that rental base, whether it be affordable rental, private rental, or cost rental, and having them in the sector in perpetuity.
Great, yeah, thanks for that, Brian. John, I'm just going to come back to you now. There's a couple of questions in. I suppose how will the LDA operationalise affordability, and will it follow the housing for all ratio of 2 to 1, so 2 affordable homes for purchase to every 1 cost rental? So that's the first question. And then the second one is in relation to the LDA managing directly cost rental properties. Is that your intention, or will it be with other partners such as AHBs?
Yeah, the ratio is we don't have a particular target ratio other than to drive affordability, and we're clear on that. But within affordability, the 2 subsets been affordable purchase and affordable cost rental. We don't have a particular target. It's largely driven by individual site and individual area characteristics. So particularly where you have apartment type homes, they tend to be more expensive to deliver. They may suit cost rental better, partially for that reason, not exclusively, but and not in all cases. I hasten to add, in Shangana, for instance, we do have planned houses that will be released for affordable purchase, but also some apartments as well. So that isn't a one size fits all approach, but it does drive the thinking. So core city areas where there's always going to be high rental demand, where there's very acute rental pressures as well as house price pressures, they are things that we take into consideration. What I would say, without being able to put a number on it, what I would say is that our portfolio at the moment is strongly pushing towards cost rental. That we would see that as a big opportunity for the LDA to play a role. So that's how we're looking at it at the moment. The 2 to 1 in favour of affordable purchase, I would say is more like at least 50-50 cost rental, if not more cost rental, in our current trajectory, in our current portfolio. And indeed, Housing for All points towards the LDA playing a particularly prevalent role in cost rental. In terms of the operation of the homes, we're open-minded. We are going to have to apply a lot of thought to this as we enter our business planning cycle from 2022 to 2026, and the delivery of the first cost rental homes should be expected around in 2023. So we obviously have to think about how we're going to manage those. The things that come to mind when we're thinking about that are what's out there, what's available at the moment. Clearly, we've an AHB sector that's very experienced in managing large scale properties, so that's a factor. Does it make sense to consolidate ownership to achieve scale so that we can, get low cost forms of finance like bonds and things like that into the sector in due course? I think that also makes sense. So we don't have a hardened view just yet on that, Karen, but it's something that is going to play a big role in our business planning over the next number of months.
Okay, John, I suppose that's very reasonable approach, and I think many will be keen to talk to you further about how that evolves. But certainly the flexibility there in relation to ratios, and actually looking at, I suppose it's a strategic approach, isn't it, to neighbourhood planning rather than just fixed ideas on ratios. And looking at the Cambridge City experience, where you're dealing with legacy embedded segregation, you know, you have different, I suppose, characteristics in different neighbourhoods. So good to see that flexibility being adopted. And speaking of Cambridge, Councillor, back over to you now for questions. I suppose there's a few there I'll group together. And the first one is, are Cambridge building just affordable housing for rent, or is it also for sale? So if you can answer that one. And then there's a few more. It's the affordability. How do you ensure the affordability in perpetuity? As Hugh mentioned in his input, we do have an issue restricting that here in Ireland. So how do you ensure that in perpetuity? And then the third question, which I'll throw at you, is what's your approach for the inclusion of wheelchair livable housing across all communities? And that one's in from Tony Cunningham in the Irish Wheelchair Association, who would be, I suppose, advocating for a greater, built-in proportion of wheelchair accessible and inclusive homes for all. So, Councillor.
Sure. These are, in terms of the overlay, these are rental properties, not home ownership properties. We do have a home ownership program. It's not quite as robust as it probably should be. I think Hugh had brought up some of the, challenges where someone gets into, a low-income person gets into a home ownership program. The city actually owns the unit. The person can then, is paying into that unit. They're building some equity, but actually when they leave, that unit goes back to the city. They can't sell it on the market. And it's a way, so then the next family can move in, the next lower moderate income family can move in. And it's the way we kind of keep those units, those home ownership units affordable, but there's no limit on how long people can live there. Most of the housing that's being built is rental. We also have an inclusion, what we call inclusionary zoning. And so this is any market rent housing over 10 units, market rent development over 10 units. 20% of those units have to go to the city's affordable housing program. So that has produced probably about 1,200 affordable units in the city. In terms of how do we ensure that they remain in perpetuity, that's built into the zoning. You don't get the developer does not get the height and density and permitting bonuses unless there's an agreement that those units stay affordable in perpetuity. So that gets worked into the deed. It gets worked into the agreement that we develop that we develop with developers. And so we do have some properties that do have some time limits on affordability. We just had these two sort of towers, if you will, where there are about 560 affordable units that the agreement with the owner was that those units remain affordable for 20 years. That affordability component ended last year, and the city invested well over $100 million into those properties to get another 20-year affordability on those units. So there are times that there are some that expire, but under the overlay, they have to be affordable in perpetuity. In terms of wheelchair, access. We do. There is the American Disabilities Act that requires that housing be accessible. There is no specific requirement, at least under the overlay, around how many units in a building must be accessible. That is a great. I really appreciate that being brought up, and something we should probably really take a look at. And you know, one of the things that we benefit from in Cambridge is that the desire, there's a lot of money to be made here in Cambridge because of Harvard and MIT, as well as our biotech community, our innovation economy. You know, we have every major player. I mean, Amazon's here, Facebook is here, Microsoft is here. And so we're able to sort of put more and more requirements on developers, both commercial and retail, and they still come. And so, you know, certainly taking a look at making sure that we're providing accessible units is something we probably could do a better job of. But I appreciate that question.
Great, and thanks, Tony, for raising that with us this morning. Councillor, I'll just throw a follow-up straight back at you. How did you overcome political resistance to your proposals?
Well, so in Cambridge, we have a sort of a funny system where the city does not directly, residents do not directly elect the mayor. They elect 9 city councillors, and then we elect the mayor amongst ourselves. And that position typically changes every 2 years. So I was mayor last term. So I introduced this overlay with some of my colleagues last term. We needed 6 votes to pass it. We had 5. So it did not pass the first time. And so it was the #1 issue in the election that year. And a councillor who had voted against the overlay lost. A councillor who was pro overlay, challenger, non-incumbent, won, and we picked up our 6th vote. So I reintroduced it, knowing that I had the votes, you know, in place, and that's how it moved forward. But it was a very, very divisive conversation in the community. And again, I think being a 5th generation Cantabrigian, I feel comfortable calling out my city sometimes, and we like to think that we call ourselves the People's Republic of Cambridge until you want to build affordable housing in somebody's neighborhood. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of reasons not to do it. And we saw that, you know, and again, it gets back to that I support affordable housing, but conversation. And so there was a lot of resistance to it, but we pushed it through. We won the election and got the votes.
You met resistance with persistence. Hugh, I have a question in there in relation to when will the local authority affordable housing schemes be operational? So maybe if you could give a bit of background on what's actually happening on the ground for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one with Fingal County Council is actually underway at the moment, and we are on site. So Fingal County Council put out a request for applications to the people in the area. They were heavily oversubscribed, and all of those houses have now been allocated, and we work then with the nominees. The second one that we're involved now, so then what about the shared equity part of that? That isn't fully finalised yet, but it looks like that the local authority will take a 20% equity share in those houses, and that will be added on to the price that we are charging them. So our average price in Doneema is around 250,000, and there will be another 20% approximately on top of that. The second scheme that we're involved with is the one with South Dublin County Council, and that hasn't gone to planning yet. Okay, so I would say we're probably 18 months away from allocation of those. And again, South Dublin County Council will put out a request for applications in their own area, and I suspect again that it will be heavily oversubscribed, and there will be 372 there. You may be aware that Cork City Council has a scheme in Boherboy. We're not involved with that. I don't think that they have been finally allocated yet, but if there's anybody from Cork in the audience, they might be able to confirm that. And then Cork also have a much larger scheme that's just in the very early stages of seeking expressions of interest, and we will get involved in that process in Kilnap. So that's kind of a synopsis of where it is at the moment.
Yeah, that's great too. Thanks a million. Brian, there's a question in here in relation to, I suppose, the process, the structure for advertising and allocating cost rental homes. So As you said in your presentation, the applications were open for 6 days. I suppose the question is that sufficient amount of time if you're only using daft.ie? So will enough people have the opportunity to be aware of it and to respond? And do you think there's a need for a central database so that all applicants can go through the same, I suppose, process and know where to find the information?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I think it would be, I mean, what we were required to do and what we were quite keen to do was that we had a process which was fair, demonstrably fair and auditable, so that, you know, anybody who could, so properties were advertised on Daft, but then people where it was signposted then to the website where there was a portal there which processed the applications and so on. And that will become more sophisticated now that the regulations are more established and so on. But I see no reason why something like that, and we're perfectly prepared to share the I suppose the IT that we have on that. You know, to make a national scheme. I think the more open and the more open and transparent we are, I think the better. Interestingly enough, if I could just change it a little bit, I do think the same types of arguments could be used for social rental housing. A lot of local authorities now are using choice-based lettings, but I think it isn't too much of a stretch to say a national choice-based letting scheme, I think, would also benefit in terms of social housing allocations, just the transparency of it, the openness of it, and I think it would make for much swifter allocations and much less void times as well. So I think there's no reason why it can't be done, and we'd be eminently open to that.
And I think there is a big reform agenda within Housing for All in terms of housing management. So some kind of central allocations process might be a useful focus for that. I suppose, Hugh, I'll just come back to you. There's a couple of questions on how Cualann, I suppose, operates. And the first one is, can Cualann scale up? So I suppose maybe that's a compliment. They want to see you doing more of your work throughout the country. And then secondly, how do you get the discount? Is it through the site, the development finance? So I suppose a little bit more detail on how that works.
Okay, so first on scaling, absolutely we can scale up, and we have that capacity. And and I should say that we're actually being supported philanthropically by Permanent TSB. They're our community partners to help us build our internal capacity, and that is going very well. We will also scale, as I said, by collaborating with other approved housing bodies, and we're doing that, and we're very grateful to TUA, who have come on board to assist us in a number of schemes now. And then you see, because all of the primary functions, if you like, in building, the design team, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, all of that is bought in, and because obviously we have to use contractors to build, which is a service that's bought in, provided that we have the private funding, well then absolutely we can scale. And so that raises the question: do you have the private funding? And the answer is yes. There is private funding available for the construction piece. We have a different issue with the pre-construction piece, but we're working on that at the moment. So yes, we can scale, and we're open to talking to others about how that can be done better. In terms of discount and our model, yes, so when we started off, our first couple of schemes were with Dublin City Council, and they've been hugely supportive, I have to say, and they did provide the sites at the plots at €1,000 per plot, whereas the value that we put onto it then for their clawback is around 30,000 per plot. So you can see that there is a big saving there. They also waived the development levies, which won't be done, and I accept it fully, by other local authorities, but Dublin City Council did. And then because we operate as a not-for-profit, like all the other AHBs, and as a registered charity, we have to set a minimum surplus that we have to make, and we set that at around 5%. Now it varies, but around 5%, and that's how we achieve the savings. And then the issue arises then: how do you protect that? And as I said, again, and I'll just reiterate it, that the local authority or the state can protect their investments by the way they have suggested with the clawback or the share equity, but that doesn't allow for permanent affordability. Whereas if the people have to sell back to us, or if there's a community land trust involved, that does protect that affordability.
Great, thanks for that, Hugh. John, I'm just coming back to yourself. I'm going to group a number of questions, so be prepared here. I suppose the first is, should the state focus its efforts on developing housing through the LDA and engage the AHBs for the landlord function for cost rental rather than having multiple actors competing for the state land? Secondly, will the LDA look at smaller state sites? And I suppose the issue of small sites for the LDA and your potential role as a driver of regeneration is being raised through a couple of questions. And then thirdly, if state bodies don't want to sell or transfer sites to the LDA, what is the stick to encourage this? So how can that be mandated?
Just taking the first two there, Karen, I guess essentially the thing there is collaboration, isn't it? And like at the LDA, I certainly don't have a sense that there's a competition nor that there should be competition in relation to NGOs, state bodies, etc., who are, as Hugh said at the outset, who are ultimately trying to achieve the same goals, competing against each other. I don't think that makes sense in a small country like Ireland to do that, especially where we're ultimately trying to achieve a scalable, affordable sector. So in terms of the LDA focusing on whether the LDA should focus on development and rather than operational aspects, again, look, it's the Land Development Agency. We have a very broad mandate that we can operate homes if that's the best way forward. But I do think that our core focus has to be on delivery, has to be on enabling, and has to be on making things happen. And if there's a way for us to collaborate in relation to doing that, but also what happens to homes once they're produced, I think we're very open to that. In relation to smaller state sites, we do have a finite capacity. We've a number of larger schemes. They tend to be 200 homes plus, that kind of scale. Where there are smaller scale opportunities, would we look at those and could we collaborate with others in terms of delivery of those? I think that's certainly possible. Put it this way, they shouldn't be untackled just because we have a certain limit or a certain capacity to focus on the larger ones. So that's something that we're also open-minded on. So if I could sum up those two questions to say that, look, collaboration has to be at the core of what we do, and that we're very open-minded in how collectively people sitting around this call and others can make things happen. In respect of sites from other state bodies, so the way to think about them is in three buckets broadly. There's local authority sites, which are controlled by the local authority's elected members. There's the state-controlled agency and body sites that are HSE and others, and then there are the commercial semi-states. So the three are distinct in terms of their governance and who decides what in relation to sites. So we have a different approach for each, and but ultimately the LDA's job is to shine a light on what lands are in all of those bodies' uses and what else could they be used for other than their existing use, particularly for housing, of course. So our approach to that is on an ongoing basis, target and negotiate with state bodies in respect of getting access to those lands to release them mainly for housing. But and you'll have seen the kind of the manifestation of that with Housing for All, with the agreement to transfer more lands to the LDA into the future. But in a general sense, it won't just stop there. We have to, it's in the LDA Act, we have to write a report to the government in respect of all of the state lands, whichever bucket they fall into, and to give advice to the government on what we think those lands should be used for. So where clearly you have certain state bodies have uses for those lands that really, has nothing to do with housing, you can understand that, and that they have needs for it. there has to be, I guess, the best people to take a view on the balance of best use of those lands, what needs to be done with them, what needs to happen is the government. So we intend to educate the government as to what the alternatives are through this report to them, but we do it on an ongoing informal basis anyway.
Great. Hugh, you want to come in there? Yeah.
Just one comment on the first part of that, John, just in terms of the small sites. And I know we've discussed this. I really do feel that there is an important role for the LDA here, but to collaborate with the likes of ourselves and I hope other approved housing bodies. And I think the way you can help there, and I think you'll be aware of this, is as part of the funding mechanism, because if we are to attract other approved housing bodies into this space, it's going to be really important that those kind of risks of the additional construction finance that they can be helped to address those risks, if you like. And one way that the LDA can do that is to underwrite the loans for that construction piece. We know that the demand is huge. We know that the ultimate risk is really small, but we know that that boards of other approved housing bodies may have difficulty in that area. So I really do feel that there is a role for the LDA there. It wouldn't take a large amount of the pot of money that you have, but it would be hugely helpful in moving along those smaller sites. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that, Hugh. Brian, an interesting question in there in relation to the future. Can you see the demand for cost rental overtaking the demand for social housing? And if so, how would the AHB sector need to reform to manage that risk?
Thanks for that. I think they are distinct needs, and I think there'll always be distinct needs into the future. I think potentially there is more need within the cost rental sector. I do think going forward that if it's given a fair wind, I think it will produce a larger sector in time. But I think even given the best will in the world and all the additional providers, and including the LDA, I think it will take time to scale up cost rental. Now, the quicker we can get there, I think the better, because I think as John has already referenced, it becomes almost like self-fulfilling. The more cost rental which is delivered, then I think the greater potential to deliver more of it occurs. It becomes better known. People see it as an option. It becomes an option for more developers. It becomes an option for more funders as well, because we've reliant on the Housing Finance Agency, who've been hugely helpful in funding the first cost rental schemes, and there's no doubt that they will be crucial to the development of cost rental into the future. But over time, if we are to attract other funders in, it needs to develop that scale, that funders and investors get confidence that this is a model which is going to remain into the future, that they can be secure in the type of model that they're investing in, that they know the returns, and that they're confident in making those returns. So I think, it is about, as John rightly put, it is about getting to scale, and the quicker we can do that, the quicker we can get those additional benefits.
Thanks very much, Brian. Councillor, just a question in relation to what impact the affordable housing overlay has had on rents. So, what kind of discount has emerged from the process?
So at this point, we passed the overlay in October 2020. There are currently about 400 units sort of in the pipeline. They haven't been built yet, but they've gone through the process. They have their funding. They're sort of in the process of being built. There's a big sort of debate that goes on here around supply and demand and how much that impacts housing. And so, as I mentioned in my presentation, and this is not just true for Cambridge, but this is the whole Metro Boston area. Metro Boston has really boomed in population. The job market has changed. And so Cambridge was once a sort of a manufacturing powerhouse. We had more candy factories than other places. We had, my family's been here 6 generations, and my grandmother and her sisters all worked in assembly lines. Now it's biotech and Google and people who are coming to work here who are making $250,000 a year, and we're not supplying. And not only we're not supplying the affordable housing for folks who are making much less than that, we're not really doing enough to supply the market rent housing. And so what happens is they come in and they go into they go to a landlord and they say, okay, well, I'll give you $3,000 a month for this apartment, and that's something that a teacher can't compete with, or someone who works in a restaurant, or or what have you. So we have it's just the rental market just continues to increase because we're really not meeting the demand. So, we hope that these units are all as subsidized. So, in the sense that everyone, there are income guidelines for these affordable units. So if you're a single person who earns between, I think at this point it's $42,000 a year up to $70,000 a year, you qualify for these units, and you pay 30% of your income for that unit. So it's not based on the I think Hugh was talking about this. It's not based on what the market is, it's what your income is. So if you make $42,000 a year, you pay 30% rent on $42,000 a year. If you make 7, and then that goes up depending on how many people are in your family. So it's sort of unclear as what it will do to the cost of housing, but I'm a believer that we have to produce more housing of all types in our city. Because we're simply just not meeting the demand, and people who have more resources and more money are always going to outbid those who don't. And so if we don't really tackle this and grab it by the horns and build more housing, those on the lower, more low and moderate income folks are going to continue to lose out.
Great. Thanks very much for that. We are at the end of the session. There are still some questions remaining. I'll just throw one out very, very quickly for whoever wants to answer it as quick as possible. The cost rental investment by the state has a longer term impact than affordable housing purchase, which only goes to the first purchasers. So should the state not be prioritising cost rental rather than affordable? Who wants to answer that?
Well, I'll make one quick comment on it, and
yeah,
just to say,
great, quick as possible.
Yeah, that there is a huge demand for affordable purchase, and the political parties recognise this. So I don't expect that will be diluted in any way. But there is also a huge demand for cost rental. So I honestly see them both going in parallel. But it is really important to get this permanent affordability piece in place, and there's no point in designing an affordable scheme if it's not going to be affordable in perpetuity.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Hugh. So I suppose it's the end of the session now. I would just like to thank all of the speakers this morning for your time, not just this morning, but in preparing your inputs. We greatly value your experience, expertise that you're sharing with us this morning. I'd like to thank the delegates who've been very lively with their questions, keeping our speakers on their toes. So thanks very much to all the delegates. The next session will be at 2 p.m. And a final reminder that the Community Housing Awards will kick off at 5 p.m. tonight, and we're really looking forward to that. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.